The windscreen wipers were losing their war against the freezing November rain. I had both hands locked around the steering wheel of my old Ford pickup, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, trying to guide the truck through the slick evening streets of central Glasgow. The sky hung low and colorless over the city, pressing the light flat against the buildings. Everything looked cold. Everything looked tired. That suited me fine. I had been carrying a heaviness in my chest for months, maybe years, and the weather outside felt like a fair reflection of whatever was left inside me. I told myself I was only heading into town to collect a new lock set and a box of screws from a builder's merchant near Trongate. Just a dull errand on a Tuesday. Just another small task for a man who had reached 69 and discovered that routine was sometimes the only thing standing between him and the past. Life has never cared much for the stories men tell themselves. I stopped at a red light near George Square, the heater blowing hot air against my knees while cold seeped through the doors and windows all the same. A bus hissed to a stop on the left. People hurried by with their collars up, eyes fixed straight ahead, each one wrapped in the private urgency of city life. That was when I saw her. She stood under the awning of a closed chemist's shop on the corner, half hidden by shadow and rain. She wore a soaked, oversized coat that looked as though it had belonged to 3 other people before it found her. In her gloved hand was a cardboard sign, the ink running in dark trails down the front. Clutched tight against her chest was a small bundle wrapped in a tartan blanket and 2 black bin liners to keep out the wet. Most people did what people always do in cities. They looked past her, not through cruelty, through self-protection. You cannot make it to the end of the day if you let every visible sorrow enter the body. I would have looked past her too. Then she turned her head to shield the bundle from the spray of a passing taxi, and I saw the line of her cheek, the shape of her mouth, the familiar angle of her brow. My breath caught so hard it hurt. My daughter, Isla, was supposed to be in a warm, immaculate flat in Bearsden, living the sort of life magazines photograph for people who still believe success can be arranged like furniture. She was supposed to be home with her husband, Oliver Fraser, and their 8-month-old daughter. She was supposed to be safe, but the woman standing in the rain looked as if she had not felt safe in a very long time. The light changed. Horns sounded behind me. I did not move. Then I threw the truck into park right there in the lane, flung the door open, and stepped out into the rain. Someone leaned on a horn. Someone shouted. I heard none of it clearly. The city seemed to draw away from me as I crossed the road through slush and dirty water. "Isla!" I shouted. She flinched violently, shrinking back toward the brick wall as if I had come to strike her. For one terrible second, she looked at me without recognition. Not because she didn't know my face, but because fear had reached her first. Then something gave way inside her expression, and I saw my daughter again, buried beneath exhaustion. "Dad," she whispered. Her lips were blue. Her face was drawn so tight over the bones that she looked older than she was. 32 years old, and she looked like someone being slowly erased. I reached toward her. She recoiled again. "No," she said quickly, almost desperately. "Dad, you can't be here. You have to go." "Go." I stared at her. "What are you doing on this corner?" Her eyes flicked to a row of parked cars across the street. Not a glance. A check. A reflex. The kind a person only learns when being watched becomes part of breathing. "They're looking," she whispered. "Please. If they see you talking to me, they'll punish me." The bundle in her arms shifted. A tiny cry came from beneath the blanket. The sound cut straight through me. "My God," I said. "Maisie?" Isla nodded once, almost too weakly to see. "My granddaughter, 8 months old, out in the freezing rain with bin liners wrapped around her like a parcel no one wanted damaged, but no one intended to shelter." I looked at the cardboard sign in Isla's hand. "Baby needs formula. Anything helps." "How long have you been standing here?" I asked. She shook her head, already crying but doing it silently. Please go. Who is watching you? She swallowed hard. Oliver's brother is in a car somewhere. Maybe him, maybe one of his friends. I don't know. They change. If I don't make 80 pounds by tonight, we don't get let back in. I felt something hard and black uncoil in my stomach. Who doesn't let you back in? She looked straight at me, and her voice went dead. Oliver. There are moments in a man's life when rage is so cold it feels like clarity. I took the sign from her hand, crumpled it once, and dropped it into the gutter. Get in the truck. Her head jerked back. Dad, no, you don't understand. If they think I've run, I understand enough. Please, she said, looking over her shoulder again. They said they'd hurt you. Get in the truck, Isla. The baby let out another thin, hungry cry. That ended it. I opened the passenger door, took Isla by the elbow as gently as I could manage, and helped her inside. She weighed almost nothing. That frightened me more than anything else so far. I went around to the driver's side, locked the doors the instant I sat down, and pulled away from the curb without checking who objected. For the first few minutes I drove without direction. I only wanted distance. Distance between us and that street. Distance between us and anyone who might have been watching. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Inside the cab, the silence was thick. The heater blew warm air that did nothing to thaw the cold I had brought in with me. Isla sat turned half away from me, curled protectively around Maisie, trembling so hard the blanket moved with her. The smell of wet wool and stale cold filled the truck. Under it was the faint sourness of old hunger. I gripped the wheel tighter. Where is Oliver? I asked at last. She gave a short, broken laugh that sounded nothing like laughter. At home. At home. I kept my eyes on the road. Does he know where you are? Yes. Does he know his wife and child are standing on a pavement in this weather asking strangers for money? Another silence. Then, in a voice so flat it barely seemed human, he dropped us off at 8:30. My hands seized on the wheel. The truck drifted toward the line before I corrected it. He what? He rotates corners, says it keeps people from recognizing me too easily. Some days Buchanan Street, some days outside Central, some days Govan if he's angry. She stared at the dashboard as if reading from something memorized. If I bring back enough, we get fed. If I don't, he says I'm proving I can't care for Maisie. I could not speak. I knew then that if she told me one more thing in that moment, I would turn the truck around, drive straight to Bearsden, and do something that would put me in prison. A prison cell helps no daughter, no granddaughter. I forced myself to breathe through my nose and think. I did not take her to my house in Milngavie. Oliver would know that address. Everyone knew that address. Instead, I headed north, out past the city, into darker roads lined with bare trees and flooded fields. Years earlier, I had bought a tiny angler's cottage near Aberfoyle, more out of stubborn sentiment than use. One room downstairs, one loft above, a stove, a narrow bed, a kettle that always tasted faintly of smoke. No one knew about it except me and a solicitor who had since retired to Spain. The rain followed us half the way there. By the time we turned down the muddy track, it had become a thin, hard drizzle that rattled against the windscreen. I got them inside, bolted the door, lit the lamps, and coaxed the cast-iron stove into life with old newspaper and dry kindling. The cottage smelled of damp wood at first, then heat, then the comforting ugliness of old smoke. I found blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed. I warmed tinned soup on the hob. I had emergency tea bags, oat biscuits, a bottle of water, and enough powdered formula left from a forgotten purchase months earlier to feed the baby. Maisie drank as if every swallow had to be earned. Isla ate too quickly, then apologized for eating too quickly, then cried because she had apologized. I told her to stop apologizing and handed her another slice of bread. She looked around the room as if she could not understand why no one was shouting. Night came hard against the windows. The woods outside disappeared into blackness. The only sounds were the stove ticking as it heated and the occasional hiss of rain against the glass. Maisie finally fell asleep on a pile of folded blankets near the fire. Isla sat on the rug, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the flames. I lowered myself into the chair opposite her and said, "Tell me everything." She shook her head once. "You'll hate me." "That's not possible." "You'll hate that I didn't come sooner." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I might hate what was done to you. I might hate myself for not seeing it. But I will never hate you." That was enough. Something in her gave way. "It started after Maisie was born," she said. "Her labor had been difficult. Emergency surgery, infection afterward, painkillers that left her foggy and slow. Oliver's mother, Vivian Fraser, moved into the flat 2 days after they came home to help with the baby. Help, it turned out, was another word for occupation. Nothing Isla did was right. She fed Maisie too often, then not enough. She held her too much, then too little. She was too emotional, too tired, too slow to answer questions, too forgetful, too sensitive. Vivian corrected every movement, every bottle, every nappy, every hour of sleep. Oliver, rather than push back, joined in. The criticisms became constant, then organized. "They stopped letting me sleep," Isla said softly. "Oliver would wake me every hour and say Maisie was crying, even when she wasn't. If I said I'd just fed her, his mother would tell me I was confused. If I said I remembered something clearly, they'd look at each other like they were worried about me. Gaslighting is too small a word for what sustained cruelty becomes inside a home. It sounds clinical, gentle, almost polite. What they did was dismantle her sense of reality piece by piece and call it care. 3 weeks after the birth, while Isla was still on antibiotics and pain medication, Oliver brought her a stack of documents and told her they were for a family trust. A precaution, a way to secure Maisie's future. She signed where he told her to sign. They were not trust papers. They were transfer papers. She signed over access to the investment account her mother had left her. She signed control of the deed to the flat, which had been bought primarily with her inheritance. She signed a broad financial authority that allowed Oliver to act in her name. "How much?" I asked, though I already knew I would hate the answer. £580,000. The number sat between us like something obscene. "Gone," she said. "Moved into accounts his mother controls. Some in Jersey, some through a holding company. A little at a time at first, then nearly all at once." I sat very still. "And after they had the money?" I asked. She looked into the fire. "They didn't need me anymore." But a clean divorce with a baby would have looked ugly, especially for Oliver. Oliver was charming in the polished, civic-minded way some men are when they have ambitions larger than their consciences. He sat on charity boards, fundraised for local housing campaigns, spoke often about family values. There was talk he intended to stand for council the following year. A public separation from a fragile postnatal wife would raise questions. Better to build a story first. So they began sending her out. At first it was for an hour, to get fresh air, then half a day, then whole days. Oliver's younger brother, Callum, would drive her to a part of the city she did not know well, take her phone, wallet, keys, and leave her there with a sign. Sometimes with the baby, sometimes without. Then later, always with the baby, because pity doubled the take. "Why?" I asked, though by then I could feel the answer approaching. "To make it look real," Isla said. "They took pictures, videos. If I cried, they filmed it. If I looked exhausted, they liked that. If someone gave me money, Oliver said it proved I was unstable and exploitative. He said when the time came, he'd show the court everything." He wasn't simply stealing money. He was curating evidence, manufacturing a portrait of maternal incompetence, building the legal coffin before burying her in it. I stood and walked to the window because sitting still had become impossible. Outside was only darkness and my own reflection staring back. "I tried to go to the police once," she said behind me. I turned. Callum dropped me near a station in Partick. I thought I could get inside before he realized. Before I got to the door, he texted me a photo. "What photo?" "You." The word was quiet. I waited. "You were in your garden, pruning the hedge. The picture was taken from across the road, through a long lens." Her mouth shook as she spoke. "He said stress kills old men quickly. He said if I told anyone, you'd have a medical emergency before evening." I closed my eyes. "I believed him," she whispered. "So I got back in the car." That was the moment guilt arrived and sat down in me properly. Heavy. Permanent. I had spent my life thinking protection meant teaching your child to be careful, to choose well, to spot danger. I had not allowed for the possibility that she would endure hell to keep me breathing. "You should have called me anyway," I said. She bowed her head. "I know." "No." I shook mine. "That isn't blame. It's sorrow." We stayed in the cottage 2 days. I let Isla sleep as long as her body demanded. The first stretch was nearly 16 hours. I fed Maisie, changed her, walked her up and down the floorboards when she fussed, and discovered that my granddaughter had a habit of going suddenly solemn before smiling. When she gripped my finger for the first time with full intention, I felt something inside me shift from rage into purpose. On the third morning, the rain finally stopped. A pale, weak light filtered through the trees. Frost clung silver to the grass. The quiet outside was almost holy until it was broken by the crunch of tires on gravel. I moved fast. I put Isla and Maisie in the back room, told her not to make a sound, and stepped onto the front porch just as a black Land Rover came to a halt beside the cottage. Callum Fraser got out wearing a camel coat and an expression he no doubt thought communicated patience. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," he called. "Lovely spot. Remote, though." "Leave." He smiled a little wider. "No need to be hostile. We're all concerned about Isla. She's had a difficult postpartum episode. Oliver's beside himself. You should tell Oliver to audition for the stage. He's wasted in property development." The smile thinned. Callum slipped his hands into his coat pockets and looked past me toward the cottage door. "We tracked your truck, by the way. Didn't take much. Newer vehicles make old men easier to find." So that was how. "She's not here," I said. He laughed softly. "Don't embarrass us both." He took one step closer to the porch. I did not move. "Here's what happens now," he said. "You send her out. We all agree she panicked. We get her proper psychiatric care, and none of this becomes unpleasant." "Unpleasant." "For you," he said. "There's already a missing person report drafted. If Oliver files it, the story becomes that an unstable mother disappeared with an infant and her elderly father helped her. That can be spun many ways." My hands were steady. That surprised me. "Get off my land," I said. Callum studied me. Perhaps he saw then that I had crossed some interior line and was no longer a man he could casually intimidate. "We'll come back with people who can make this formal," he said at last. "Bring everyone you like." His jaw hardened. He got back into the Land Rover, reversed down the track, and disappeared through the trees. I stood there another 10 seconds, listening to the engine fade. Then I went inside and said, "We're leaving. Now." There was no point hiding any longer. Running would only prolong their advantage. We needed proof, strategy, and someone whose job it was to know how to break men like Oliver without giving them time to rearrange the truth. I drove us back toward Glasgow by back roads and industrial estates, avoiding the main motorways where I could. Isla sat in silence with Maisie in her lap, but there was a different silence in her now. Less hunted, more exhausted. The kind that follows after a person accepts that the worst has already happened and what comes next is simply consequence. We went straight to the office of Duncan Mercer. Duncan had once been a solicitor with a reputation for corporate disputes. Over the years, he became the man people hired when money, marriage, reputation, and betrayal all tangled together into the sort of knot ordinary lawyers call unfortunate, and Duncan called billable. 20 years earlier, I had pulled him from a crashed estate car after he hit black ice outside Sterling. Since then, he had sent a Christmas card every year, always with a note saying he still owed me one. He took one look at Isla, then at the baby, and his face went hard. He shut the door himself and said to his assistant, "Cancel everything." We told him the story. He did not look shocked. He looked angry in the quiet way competent men do when they have finally met something worthy of their full attention. "This is a custody frame-up tied to financial abuse," he said when Isla finished. "Classic in shape, vicious in detail. The problem will be proof. We need documents they can't explain and records they can't bury." He picked up the phone and called Amina Rahman. Amina arrived within the hour carrying a laptop, 2 encrypted drives, and the sort of calm that made me trust her immediately. She was a forensic accountant who spoke softly and moved like someone who enjoyed detail the way some people enjoy revenge. "If the money moved through anything even slightly legitimate," she said, sitting down, "it left tracks." She began to work. While she did, Duncan arranged for Isla and Maisie to be examined by a doctor he trusted. He wanted documentation of malnutrition, sleep deprivation, stress markers, exposure. Not because I needed convincing, but because courts prefer paper to grief. I paced. Isla sat with Maisie sleeping against her shoulder and stared at the floor. After 40 minutes, Amina said, "I've got something." We gathered around her screen. The transfer authorization for the investment account was uploaded at 2:14 a.m. on the 12th of March, she said. Isla was still in Queen Elizabeth University Hospital recovering from surgery at that time. She clicked again. And the electronic witness certificate attached to the document references a practicing conveyancer whose registration lapsed 18 months before this was filed. Duncan leaned back in his chair. "Forgery. There's more." She opened another window. He was sloppy with cloud backups. Texts. Oliver to Callum. "Keep her out until dark. The footage is more convincing if she looks disoriented." Another. "If she starts talking about her father again, remind her his blood pressure isn't ideal." Another. "Mum says the custody bundle needs 3 more weekends of video." Isla made a small choking sound. Duncan handed her a glass of water without saying anything. Amina kept digging. Bank transfers routed through Vivian's accounts. An insurance policy worth £1.4 million taken out on Isla 6 weeks earlier. Accidental death rider included. Primary beneficiary, Oliver Fraser. For the first time that day, Duncan swore. They were preparing for every ending, he said. And then, as if cruelty were never satisfied without spectacle, Oliver posted. A video began circulating through local Facebook groups and WhatsApp chains by late afternoon. Someone in the office found it before we could stop it. It showed Isla on a wet pavement, head down, baby against her chest, the edge of her sign visible in frame. Oliver's caption spoke of mental health, concern, prayer, and the desperate hope of a husband trying to bring his wife and child home. The comments were exactly what you imagine strangers become when handed a lie they can use to feel morally clean. Poor man. She looks dangerous. That poor baby. Some women shouldn't be mothers. Isla saw enough before she turned away and started to cry. I reached for the phone. Duncan took it from my hand. "Don't," he said. "He's destroying her." "No," Duncan said. "He's overcommitting to a story." "That's better." He set the phone down face down on the table. "Let him feel safe. Let him believe this is working. Then we choose the room." The room turned out to be a private conference suite at a hotel near the Clyde. Duncan contacted Oliver's solicitor and said Isla was exhausted, frightened, nearly broke, and willing to sign a temporary custody arrangement if charges against me for abduction or interference were taken off the table. Pride is the easiest lever in the world once a vain man believes he has won. Oliver agreed to meet the next morning. That night, Amina prepared a dossier thick enough to hurt someone. Transfer chains, timestamps, invalid witnessing records, insurance documents, the text messages, metadata, screenshots of Oliver's social media lies, photos of Isla's condition taken by the doctor, a timeline mapped so cleanly that even a fool could follow it. I slept on Duncan's office sofa. Not well, not deeply. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Isla under that awning in the rain. Morning came cold and clear. I put on my best suit. It was tight at the shoulders and loose at the waist, the way clothes become when life has taken more from you than age has. Isla wore a dark blue dress Duncan's assistant had bought for her before the shops closed. She looked pale, still fragile, but no longer untethered. There was steel in her now. Quiet steel. Expensive men often mistake that for surrender until it is too late. We arrived at the hotel early. Duncan had already arranged for a recording system disguised in the room's speaker cabinet. Amina sat in the adjoining suite monitoring the feed. 2 detectives and a financial crimes officer waited elsewhere in the building, ready to come in when called. At 10 sharp, the door opened. Oliver walked in first. He wore a charcoal suit, dark tie, polished shoes, and the expression of a man prepared to perform mercy. Behind him came Vivian, immaculate in cream wool, and Callum, carrying himself with the same easy contempt he had worn at the cottage. Oliver saw Isla and spread his hands. Thank God. She didn't move. He lowered his arms slowly and sat. Vivian looked at me as if I were a stain on a carpet someone else ought to remove. We've brought the papers, Oliver said, sliding a folder onto the table. This can all end today. Duncan smiled faintly. That depends on your definition of ending. Oliver ignored him and looked at Isla. Sign temporary custody to me, agree to inpatient treatment, and we can make this go away quietly. I won't pursue your father if you behave reasonably. The words hung there. I glanced at Isla. She met his eyes and said, And the money? Vivian gave a sharp little laugh. Money? Is that truly where your mind is? Mine usually is when someone steals it, Isla said. Oliver's face tightened, only for a second. You signed everything, while recovering from surgery. You were informed. I was drugged and infected. He looked toward Duncan. This is absurd. Duncan opened his folder and slid the first document across the table. The time-stamped transfer authorization, then the witness registration issue, then the bank routing records, then the insurance policy. Oliver went pale so gradually it was almost interesting to watch. Callum shifted in his seat. Vivian's voice sharpened. Where did you get these? Through means that will satisfy a sheriff, which is the only audience that matters, Duncan said. Oliver pushed back his chair. You had no right. I have every right to represent my client against fraud, coercive control, and criminal conspiracy, Duncan said calmly. Sit down. Oliver did not sit. Then Isla spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically. You took my mother's money, she said. You drugged me with exhaustion. You put our daughter in the cold to make me look mad. You made me beg in the streets so you could steal her next. Every word landed. Callum stood. We're leaving. Try, Duncan said. He pressed a button under the table. The door opened at once. 2 detectives entered with a woman from the Economic Crime Unit close behind them. A uniformed officer took position by the doorway. The temperature in the room changed so suddenly it almost seemed physical. Vivian rose halfway from her chair. This is outrageous. One of the detectives looked at Oliver. Mr. Fraser, we need you to remain seated. Callum took 1 step backward. Do not, the officer said. No one shouted. No one lunged. That is not how real collapse looks most of the time. It looks bureaucratic, precise, airless, rights being read, questions deferred, devices requested, expressions failing in stages. Oliver tried one last pivot. This is a misunderstanding. My wife is unwell. Isla did not flinch. Then explain the life insurance policy. He said nothing. Explain the videos. Nothing. Explain why your brother texted me photographs of my father. Callum looked toward the floor. I watched them all and felt no triumph, only a grim settling, the kind you feel when a door finally closes on a storm that should never have entered the house in the first place. The detectives led them out one by one. Oliver protested. Vivian demanded names. Callum stayed silent. When the room emptied, Isla sat back down and covered her face with both hands. Not because she was ashamed. Because when terror ends, the body often has nowhere graceful to put the absence of it. I sat beside her and rested a hand between her shoulders. Maisie stirred in her carrier and made a soft waking sound. Duncan closed the folder and said, "Now the long part begins." He was right. It took 7 months for the legal dust to settle. Oliver accepted a plea arrangement when the financial records, text messages, and witness statements made trial a danger rather than a strategy. Callum folded soon after. Vivian fought longer and more viciously than either of them, but money is less persuasive when your accounts are frozen and the people around you begin saving themselves. The forged transfers were reversed in stages, not all at once. Justice has never been as fast as injury. But eventually, Isla recovered the majority of the inheritance, the sale proceeds from the flat, and control of what remained of her life. She sold the Bearsden flat the moment she legally could. Said the walls remembered too much. With the money returned, she bought a modest stone house outside Helensburgh, with a patch of garden, 2 bedrooms, a bright kitchen, and enough grass for Maisie to fall over safely while learning to run. It is 12 minutes from my house if the roads are kind. I see them almost every day now. Maisie is walking, running really, though without much regard for balance. She has Isla's chin and her mother's habit of looking directly at things that interest her, as if politeness can wait. Isla has color in her face again. Real color. She sleeps. She laughs sometimes without checking whether she is allowed. The first time I heard that, I had to leave the room for a moment and stand in the garden until I trusted my own expression. Last Sunday, I sat on my porch with a mug of tea gone cold in my hand and watched Maisie chase a red leaf across the grass while Isla planted winter pansies near the fence. She looked up, caught me watching, and smiled. A real smile. Not the thin, careful version she wore when survival depended on making other people comfortable. Not the frightened smile of someone trying to de-escalate a room. A true one. Warm, unguarded. Her mother had that smile. Seeing it again after all those months felt almost unbearable. People like to think safety comes from the visible things. Marriage certificates, nice addresses, expensive prams, public charm. Men who speak softly at fundraisers. Women who arrange flowers and call themselves practical. It does not. The world is full of polished lies. What protects us, when anything does, is far simpler and far harder. It is the person who does not drive past. The person who asks again when the first answer is wrong. The person who enters the rain. The person willing to become inconvenient, difficult, relentless, embarrassing, legally meticulous, and impossible to frighten. I used to think love was mostly tenderness. Age corrected me. Love is tenderness, yes, but when required, it is also evidence, timing, witnesses, endurance, a locked jaw, a hand held steady long enough to carry someone out of darkness without dropping them. I am not proud of every thought I had during those weeks. Rage is seductive. So is revenge. But what saved my daughter was not the ugliest thing in me. That only got me moving. What saved her in the end was discipline, the refusal to strike blindly, the decision to let the truth sharpen itself until it could cut cleanly. That is less dramatic than violence. It is also more useful. Whenever the weather turns now, I think about that pavement in Glasgow, the soaked cardboard, the baby under the blanket, the way I nearly convinced myself it had nothing to do with me. I thank God I was wrong, because when the storms come, and they always do, we do not get many chances to choose correctly. Sometimes all that stands between a person and disappearance is whether someone who loves them is willing to step out into the rain.